I think it's fitting to start by observing that there are certain events in the history of a nation that turn out to be inflection points or turning points. One such event for us was 26/11, and since then it is true that a lot has happened. There have been police stations that have been set up. There are radar chains, AIS chains. The National Maritime Domain Awareness Scheme. There's the NAT grid, the IMAC in Gurgaon, which does a lot of collation of information, distribution of the picture. There's a Sagar Prahari Bal, and there's a lot else that you hear from all the three maritime agencies when you talk to them about maritime security. But you scratch a little more, and you realize that the degree of success that each of these individual initiatives has achieved is entirely dependent on the perception of that particular agency. For instance, if you were to talk to the Navy has a very upbeat picture, a very sanguine picture of what's been achieved. So they will draw your attention to the achievements, and they'll say that, look at, where were we in 2008? We weren't even talking to the Coast Guard. Now you see, we talk to them, we do the defense of Gujarat, we do the defense of Kerala, we've got, our exercises are great, we're doing so much with the coastal police, these guys are getting online, they're doing the job that is required, and things are great. And they will also draw your attention to the fact that there is, these technical schemes, the LRIT, inspires and all of the stuff that Kawana Chandel spoke about. So the Navy takes great pride in the big ticket items, the blockbuster items. That's the Navy's thrust. You speak to the Coast Guard, they have a slightly different take. They will acknowledge that yes, there have been some achievements, but they say that most of it is really superficial. Because the problem still remains. The problem for the Coast Guard, as I see it, is that the Coast Guard believes that it is the lead agency. It should be the lead agency in all of this. Somehow it doesn't quite have the freedom to operate in the way that it thinks is appropriate for the nation. Second, it draws your attention to the fact that the essential problem with coastal security is the marine police. And there has been really no improvement. They've got all the equipment now, at least the Coast Guard says, we think that they have all the equipment, they have personnel, but they're not trained. The equipment sometimes is lying all defunct. So basically the marine police is a laggard, and we haven't been able to sort of integrate them into the synergy that we now see developing with the Navy. So the Navy and the Coast Guard can be happy about, maritime security 20 miles away from the sea, but 5 miles is what is really required, and that doesn't seem to be happening. If you speak to the police, they say, look, the fact is, we really have no skin in this game. This is something, we've been included into this by stealth. We are trying to do the best that we can, but you've got to feel for us, man. We don't have the equipment, we don't have the personnel, we don't have the aptitude. Our men don't want to go out to sea. We are here to catch the criminals on land. So why is it that this thing keeps coming back to us? Because the way we look at it, you are trying to foist this whole responsibility on us by constantly reminding us that 5 miles is all that matters. If you do your job well, there will be no incidents. So it is entirely a matter, as I said, of perception. That somehow has something to do with self-image. The Navy, and this is, you might find this strange coming from a naval officer, really believes that it actually has nothing to do with coastal security. But that it is doing a bloody good job. And so the Navy will draw your attention to all the great things that have happened, with the full knowledge that really speaking, it's not the Navy's responsibility to do this. The Coast Guard believes, it's again self-image, that it has everything to do with coastal security, but the credit is appropriated by the Navy. And there was a Coast Guard officer who pointed out to me to say that, do you know that your maritime security, the biggest chapter is the chapter on coastal security? I said, yeah. He said, what does coastal security have to do with, Indo-Pacific region strategy in the wider commons? And that, I think, is a good point. Because generally speaking, I'm just being frank here, for the Navy, the coastal security scheme is also, in a manner of speaking, a brownie point generating initiative or an endeavor. A lot of funds that were meant for far sea security were actually utilized in the past 6 years doing coastal security. And the Navy's got to talk about it. It's got to tell people what it's done. Even though the Coast Guard feels let down because they think that they're the real lead agency, and They're the ones that have really got to coordinate this. Second point, and I found this point really fascinating, is that a Coast Guard officer once told me that, you see, you can talk about all the e-surveillance, electronic surveillance in the world. Coastal security is dependent on intelligence. Intelligence comes from the man on the ground. And that man on the ground actually is cultivated by state sources. So you and me, or you and us, can only do so much. Really speaking, it's the police. It is the collector of the state agencies that must. Now the thing is about the state, and this gets me to the second point, which is the Central Marine Police Force. You would be surprised to know that many in the Navy and in the state actually agree with the Central Marine Police Force for entirely different reasons. For the Navy, everything is command and control. If you can control a force, if they can obey your orders, they will do a good job on the ground. So the Navy, some people in the Navy, especially in the operations branch, when I spoke to them some time back, they said that, well, it looks to be a good scheme, because you see, the problem is that these guys don't take orders from us. They're in their own loop. They keep doing their own thing. Now, on the face of it, we may be able to control them quite well. For the state government, or for the state agency, this is about divesting responsibility. The point has already been made. We have nothing to do with this. You guys can handle this. We are getting out of here. This is the thing that needs to be done. Please coordinate your efforts and do whatever has to be done. The Coast Guard has the most, I think, nuanced approach on this. So some of the Coast Guard officers tell me that when you will try doing coastal security, when a Central Marine Police Force will try doing central coastal security duties with people from the Navy and the Coast Guard who are, say, from Gujarat and operating in Tamil Nadu, how will they speak to the people? Do they know the language? And that is true. They don't know the language. You can train them to do a good job, but will they be able to gather the intelligence? They will not be able to gather the intelligence. So the Coast Guard points out that if you can somehow convince the state to train their men to do coastal security duties without having a Central Marine Police Force, that is the ideal option. I am quite persuaded by that argument. What's it that needs to be done? For me, there's 4 areas that are really critical to this. One is that there are, contrary to what has been suggested by some of the speakers before me, there are critical gaps that exist. There was a question in Parliament in Rajya Sabha that was asked last year on what was the state of coastal security. And this is what was said. It was said that there's critical gaps that remain. The radar coverage is inadequate, regardless of the fact that we have 46 radars and some 74 AIS and all of that. It said the radar coverage was inadequate. The ISPS code implementation has been partial. The AIS implementation is slow. The networking of agencies, which is Navy with the Coast Guard, with the police, is a work in progress. And there is a dearth of qualified intelligence people, which is the point I'm going to get to in about a minute or so. And it said this container security initiative has yet to be implemented. So really speaking, on all fronts, there are critical gaps. I needn't belabor the point that intelligence is key, and in all of these meetings that are held between us, Pushpita made the point, a critical area of concern is that the intelligence doesn't flow as well. I'd like to draw your attention to the US model, and I spoke about it briefly in the morning. In the US, the Coast Guard is the lead agency, the lead coastal security agency, and it is also the lead intelligence agency. So the Coast Guard gets the information, it collates the information, it evaluates the information, and it disseminates the information. That kind of thing, the Coast Guard officers pointed out to me, doesn't happen with us. We pride in intelligence that we have because we can act on it. And there is almost a competition sometimes between the 3 agencies on who has the intelligence and who can act. So I agree with the point that Pushpita makes that most often intelligence is the big gray area, and it sort of doesn't flow very well. Which is why I think the task force model is a good model. I was talking with Admiral Shekhar Sinha, who's the CNC, the Commander-in-Chief of the Western Naval Command, just a few days ago, and he made some very interesting points to me. He said that in my meetings with the Chief Minister at that time in 2010 of Maharashtra, there's something that kept coming up again and again. The Chief Minister was very candid to admit to me that I should not be forced to spend any money on too much of biometrics, getting transponders installed on small boats, getting the color codings done. There are just no funds for that. And what he pointed out to me is that unless we don't have a task force model in which when you have the JOCs, which is the joint operation centers or committees, you need to have representation from all streams: Coast Guard, Customs, police. That has, I think, still not happened. That's a really good point, that it has to be an institutionalized presence. At the moment, what is happening is that the JOCs, the Navy takes responsibility for the JOCs. There is some Spartan presence of the Coast Guard, but otherwise, there is really no interest or even commitment to the JOCs by a lot of other agencies. My second point would be that there is a need for us to look at having a joint training. Admiral Shekharton also pointed out to me that it's a good idea to have a center wherein you can have naval instructors, Coast Guard instructors, some police people training together. Because what's really important in coastal security is to have standard SOPs or standard operating procedures, and also have a doctrine worked out. Now, that the reason why we don't have, and this point again I made in the morning, we don't have a doctrine worked out, there's less interoperability, is because we don't have common rules of engagements, there are no common codes that we follow. So one of the areas that we can look at is to have some sort of joint training. My third area, I think, is going to be that, a third area, I think, I've already made this point in passing, is that we've got to look at a way in which we look at coastal security as a joint endeavor. It is not a brownie point generating scheme. It's not something that can get you credit. And if you are committed, if all the agencies are committed together in doing this, I think there's a lot to be that can be achieved. My last point is this. This is, again, a little bit of a philosophical point, but I think I've got to make this, which is that if you look at nations' offensive strategies, there's always place for creativity, ingenuity. You can try and use novel means to tame the adversary. When you look at defensive schemes, many officers have pointed out to me, it is about having common procedures. It's about being able to do things by rote. You've done interoperability so many times, you worked with the Coast Guard so many times, the police so many times, you instinctively, reflexively know what needs to be done. So it essentially the same point. But it is simply saying that let's, instead of just focusing on the big threat from Pakistan, the militants coming in, the LTT and all of that, let's look at lower order issues first. If we can sort out the glitches that exist in the system by looking at lower order issues, then we can then also tackle the higher order issues. I think that would be it. And if I'd love to take questions about the observations that I've had talking to some of the senior people in the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the police. Thank you.